Welcome back to History 101. This week we'll be looking at the issue of sexuality. You had a few readings that focus on multiple aspects of sexuality, prostitution, and you read that small excerpt on the Jewish penis is better than the Christian penis, and obviously Boswell's piece on homosexuality in the Middle Ages. So, sorry, we'll be exploring how not so much focusing on just homosexuality for the purpose of just doing that, but really to show you how every era kind of examines sexuality through different lenses. And this is important because a lot of times we use certain texts, such as maybe the Bible, to kind of justify our perspective on sexuality, and we find that every era interprets it differently. So that's really the goal here. Whether you're for it or against homosexuality, that's really your personal opinion and your personal belief. But here we're looking at it from a very academic lens to show you that in the Middle Ages, sexuality was very diverse from, say, today's perspective. So we're going to kind of touch on that a little bit, all right? So I want to first show you this picture right here that you see. This actually comes from Pompeii. If you ever get the chance to go, they have these bathhouses, and when you go in there, they have different images that show these type of pictures, not just this one, but other types of sexual acts. And it's supposed to be like a locker room. So to some extent, you kind of remember where you left your stuff, and you go into this locker, basically, and that's where your stuff will be located. But it does kind of tell us a little bit about the ancient world and how they looked at sexuality, right? Today, I'm not sure if this would be okay in a men's locker room, whereas in Pompeii, it was no big deal. And as you can kind of see here, you have a woman and two other people engaging in this sexual activity. The Middle Ages very much so kind of contrast this idea. However, you do see a lot of imagery of sexuality in the Middle Ages, a lot of phallic symbols in some these little books that they had, these kind of manuscripts that they used to have. And it was funny because you see like rabbits with big old penises kind of sticking out. So in a period that we don't necessarily associate with sexuality, we find that it's quite rampant. So we're going to begin by looking at the ancient world. So not the Middle Ages, but the pre-Middle Ages. So everything from Greece to Rome. And I'm going through this very generically and very quick, just to kind of give you a contrast between the ancient world and the medieval world. So first off, before I start that, I kind of want to drive this point home that prior to the 1900s, there is no concept of homosexuality as an identity. Now that's important to note because a lot of time we use a lot of text to say, well, this says it's against this, and we find that in the medieval world, or sorry, prior to the 1800s, there's really no idea of what this identity was because it didn't even exist. We first see the word emerge in like the 1860s in Europe. And by around the 1900s, late 1800s, you begin to see this idea being tied with somebody's identity. So the word homosexual is kind of constructed in the 1860s, but then it becomes part of, a person's identity, not by choice, but it's kind of put upon them. If you ever study Oscar Wilde, he becomes the embodiment of homosexuality. But prior to this period, there is no concept of homosexuality. And just to give you another kind of fun fact, in Mexico, it's around this time, about 1900, where the concept of homosexuality first emerges. And what happens there is that they blame the United States and the British for bringing homosexuality to Mexico. There's a famous event called Los 41, which means 41, where 41 men were arrested for engaging in this, what we would call homosexual activity. It was just about 40 41 men all together, half of them dressed as women, half of them dressed as men, and all they were doing was having like a dance ball. It was connected to the government and a big old scandal that happened in Mexico. The interesting thing about that particular event in Mexico is that Mexican men never admit that they're 41 in regards to our age. They say that they're 40 or 42 because there's this perception in Mexico that when you turn 41, you might turn gay, right? And, there's no fact to any of that. But around the age of 40, you go through a midlife crisis, and so forth and so on. But the point, what we see here is that at the age of 41 is directly linked to this event, Los 41, that essentially gets lost in history. And like I said earlier, many Mexican people begin to blame the United States for bringing this idea to their country. So just kind of goes to show how sexuality is so fluid. So we begin by looking at the Spartans. When we look at some of our ancient civilizations, we find that these are civilizations that we value. I mean, we look at Greece in a very high regard because we get a lot of our beliefs from them, right? Democracy and so forth, and we see them as some of the greatest civilizations in world history. But there's one topic is something that we all feel very uncomfortable with. Well, we find that in ancient Greece, again, we can't use the word homosexual because they would have never understood that word. What we do find, though, is that men tended to be together for long periods of time. And a lot of this has to do with warfare. If you ever watched the movie 300, these men spend a lot of time on campaign with each other. So you're going to develop bonds with each other. And also, we have to understand that the way the ancient world looked at the relationship between the sexes. So, being with another man put you in a position with somebody of equal status, unlike later periods. But in this period, we see this ideal relationship between a man and a man. Right, both of you are of high status. Women are second-class citizens during this period. So, being with another man is something seen as superior than being with a woman. Though, again, many of these people were very would also engage in marriage. They would be with men, they would be with women. It wasn't a major issue. Now, why did this happen? Well, if you ever study Greek philosophy and study Aristotle, there's this belief that certain people are just superior to other people. And when it comes to the sexes, men are superior to women. Again, that's not what we believe today, but that's the way the ancient world believed these type of ideas. So you have this kind of male and female dichotomy where male are viewed as superior and women are viewed as inferior. And as you can see in the ancient world, you see the male body very much so held in high regard. They constantly created these kind of perfect ideals of what the male body looked like. And there's a lot of books out there that talked about Greek, what we would call Greek homosexuality. So if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email and I'll make some suggested reading list. Another important group that we must talk about is Rome. This is called the Warren Cup, and it was found, I think, in the Middle East, kind of like in the Israel area. So imagine finding this out, or being alive during the Roman period, and somebody walking around with a cup like this, right? And here you see like an older man with a younger boy, which tend to be the common relationship that we would see. And for many, it was seen as temporary, but some people did it for a good portion of their lives. So when we look at sexuality in Rome, we find that their concept of sexuality is much more diverse than the Middle Ages. They had things like orgies and, kind of like a free-for-all, right, when it comes to sexuality. And part of it has to do just with the Roman mentality. It was about excess, not just in sex, but also just in life, whereas in the Middle Ages, it was about controlling your urges, right? We talked about asceticism, and you're not supposed to eat, and you're not supposed to talk, going against the will of what the body wants to do. In Rome, it was quite the opposite. It was, explore as much as you can, whether it be food or, whatever it may be, obviously sex. Do the things that bring you pleasure. We note that most Roman emperors were, engaged in these type of relationship. It is noted that in history, there's only one that didn't. His name is Claudius. And one historian noted that Claudius was an idiot. So it kind of alludes to this notion that, homosexuality or, male-male relationships was a good thing for our leaders in the ancient world. People like Hadrian, built monuments to his lover after he drowned. And all these Roman emperors engaged in this type of act, right? It wasn't seen as anything different. I think Nero slept with his sisters, so I can't remember. I think it might be Claudius's wife. I can't remember. One emperor's wife. She actually competed with a prostitute as to who could sleep with the most men, and it's a funny story because eventually a prostitute just kind of caved in. She couldn't take it anymore. She gave up, and Massalia, I think her name was, she declared herself the victor and went back home and took, I think, 2 men with her. So it just kind of shows that sexuality was something that was viewed as a good thing in this particular period. Claudius was the only heterosexual emperor, and again, he was an idiot. And we find that same-sex activity was not illegal during this period. Male prostitution gets taxed well into the, I think, 5th century. So it is something that the state also benefited from. So male prostitution and male-male relationships were quite common. I mean, typically you have men going to prostitutes. You don't really see women going to them, though. There's always exception to the rule, but for the most part, it's men going to these male prostitutes. So we find that they were, for the most part, okay with this. And again, note that Rome is seen as one of the greatest civilizations in history, right? A lot of times we look back to Rome. The glory days of civilization is Rome, one of the greatest empires. And this, if we're going to take that aspect of it, we got to take this aspect of it too, because they were so open to this act. It was taxed into the 6th century. I think I said 5th century. And we find that they even had their own holidays. So I think one historian kind of blamed homosexuality for the fall of the Roman Empire. And it's a very false premise because, it had always gone on. So you can't really argue that that's what brought down the empire if it happened for centuries, right? So we find that in the ancient world, male-male relationships were quite common. Now, you read a piece on the medieval world, particularly early medieval world, and you see how the church looks at homosexuality. You see how Muslims look at homosexuality. You look at also how just Europeans and pagans look at homosexuality. And by no means are we arguing that the church was okay with it, because they weren't. But there was this idea that they had to basically deal with it, but deal with it in a way that doesn't hurt the church. So we're going to explore that a little bit more. And again, you have that reading that talks quite a bit about it and addresses some of the things that we'll be addressing. So I'll stop it here. There'll be some discussion questions, and we'll continue this conversation to see how the High Middle Ages looked at homosexuality.